You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Hey, welcome to the Diginauts. Did you have problems with your internet on Friday? A whole lot of people did. We're going to talk about why and how it might be prevented in the future.
What if your thoughts could be translated without actually saying anything?
And who's spying on you now using technology? Coming up on the Diginauts. Society,
The future,
morality,
disruption,
policy,
humanity,
innovation,
technology, morality, the future.
I have all sorts of bad thoughts. I freely admit this.
Diginauts.
Greetings, people of Earth. Hello. You found episode 6 of the Diginauts. Hi, Eric.
How's it going, Darren?
I'm doing well.
Nice.
But the internet was not doing well on Friday.
Why not?
Well, they're still working on why not, actually. But there was a big shutdown. The internet broke.
A shutdown?
Well, and
Or was it more of a meltdown?
It was a no. I'm gonna go with shutdown because somebody was trying to shut her down.
Because other things have melted down. Samsung.
I hate. You're just gonna shit on Samsung every episode. I have a pet peeve, a minor distraction, minor sidetrack here. When anybody says that something broke the internet, it's like, shut up.
Kim Kardashian tried.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the main area, right? Like, it's such a clickbaity, like, what so-and-so from this TV show from the 60s looks like now will blow your mind, will drop your jaw.
Right.
It's like, you can't phrase English
Click
that way.
through 5 pages in a slideshow just to get more ads.
Boo. Shame on you. That's what's breaking the internet, is those guys. Anyway, no, we're talking about the DDoS attack that happened on Friday. Distributed, what's DDoS? Distributed denial of service attack, which is when essentially what happens is hackers get into your computer. They get a virus in there. So if you've ever gotten an email that says, like, hey, here's that invoice I was going to get you, and that's all it says, and it's from somebody you don't recognize, and you click on it. That's what they were doing, right?
Or you're owed a lot of money from Kenya.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you send $10,000 to this Nigerian prince, he will absolutely give you $900 million as soon as he can get to the States. Yeah, no. So they'll sneak this little, malware. A little virus is, I guess, virus works.
Not good intention.
Yeah, exactly. A tiny little snippet of code will go live inside your operating system, and then when the time comes and they say the magic word, then that snippet of code starts using your device to do the bidding of the bad guys. Right.
Now, you mentioned computers, but what about other things?
Yeah, it can happen to all sorts of things. It can basically happen to anything with an IP address, and that's what's significant about the one that happened this last Friday.
Right.
Because it wasn't computers. We've seen that before. This was the first one that we're kind of blaming the Internet of Things. Which I'm going to, keep explaining at the top of this episode, because I don't know. A lot of our listeners are going to be tech savvy and going to know things, but just in case, the Internet of Things is the term for the new everything's connected state of the internet that we're driving towards, where you don't just have your computer and your phone that connect up to your Wi-Fi. You have your TV, which is able to, deliver things off of the internet, and then it goes right on down to, your refrigerator, and your refrigerator knows whether you're missing eggs and uploads a message to send some more eggs to something that you've got on your phone, et cetera, to the point that, like, everything's going to be connected. Your car, your battery,
your drone,
your electric toothbrush,
your Amazon Echo.
Yeah, certainly your Amazon Echo, exactly. I think we're going to need new IP addresses, I thought I read again. Like,
Not sure.
Because I remember when they switched them over, in the 90s, there was that sort of like, wow, we can't believe we ran out of IP addresses.
Right.
We better make it something that could never run out. So we're going to make it this super long thing. But of course, they didn't anticipate that, your hairbrush would eventually need an IP address all to itself.
Well, I think every person should get one at birth.
Oh, scary.
No social security number, it's your IP address.
Well, we'll save that for another segment. But yeah, so the attack that happened on Friday was about the Internet of Things. It wasn't the computers that we've seen in the past. This particular attack was people's stuff. Your baby monitor and your DVR were able to. And I didn't finish DDoS. Once it's activated, it sends traffic of one kind or another. It could be as simple as like sending a number over and over and over again to a given IP address. And in this case, it was Dyn, which is a internet backbone company that supplies big sites. So, Twitter basically broke on Friday because this, one of the main places where their servers are hosted was not able to do anything because it was so busy receiving tiny little signals from who knows how many, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of devices that were otherwise sitting around doing nothing, right? Like if the baby monitor in my house were being exploited to do this, I wouldn't know.
Right.
So did you notice the internet go down on Friday?
I didn't notice. I read about it, but I wasn't impacted by it.
I definitely picked up that Twitter wasn't working and that Reddit wasn't working. And it also, it rolled out in 3 different waves. So it impacted people on the East Coast first. And then the West Coast was like the second or third wave.
Interesting.
And it landed some places in Europe too. So there were like 6 different countries, but mostly it was U.S. So the immediate response is, sort of, who is this? What is this? Right? Because it's one of those things, if you're the United States government, that you're like, oh shit,
it's Putin.
Our nuclear weapons can't stop this. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's you joke about Putin, but Russia was certainly something that at least the good people at CNN tossed around. Like, could this be? I don't actually know that, but without having watched CNN, I do know that. But anyway, the point of the story is that that the sort of initial suspicion, because it's so top of mind with everybody, that we've got those kind of like rumors around of like, oh, are they going to mess with the elections, et cetera, and there's kind of a looming menace. Well, is this related to that? There's no evidence that it was.
What's interesting, like they use those devices to disrupt other internet sites,
right?
But from what I know, like it didn't disrupt those respective devices. So it's not like refrigerator doors are opening all over the place. Garage doors are opening and closing.
Yeah, well, like, if you think about it, go ahead.
To me, like you could probably cause way more chaos by sending those actual devices going bonkers.
Oh, I don't think so. Because, like I said, I wouldn't know if the baby monitor was doing this, right? So if I did know, I might unplug it and stop it from doing its thing.
That's
right?
fair.
Like if the refrigerator doors start flying open, then everybody reboots their refrigerators.
Right. That's fair.
Now, and then the fun and scary thing about this is if you look at sort of where our state of technological growth is, we're at a place where the Internet of Things is, I'm going to try to remember what I read earlier today, but I'll put it in the show notes. So if I get it wrong, you'll be able to reference it. But it was roughly like 6 billion connected devices right now, which is amazing. Like roughly as many as humanity. And they're guessing that we're going to reach something in the neighborhood of 20 billion, so tripling in 4 years. So this is definitely like, I'm kind of like, investing in what do I,
I can.
Well, yeah. Sort of. ICANN is the major DNS company, but aren't they international?
They are international. We basically handed them the keys to the castle of the internet. What is interesting, and maybe we'll talk about this in another episode or whatnot, they have this whole secretive process where they renewed the keys.
I read about that.
It's
like
unreal.
7 dudes own the internet, basically.
There's checks. They roll up their sleeves to prove they're not hiding a card, a physical card. And if like the backup card holders die, like their cards are in a vault of which they can access irrespective of those people living or not.
I interviewed there. I was, well, I can't say that I was going to be offered a job, but I was. I'm pretty sure. And I had to move on a different job offer, but I was in kind of the negotiation phase with them to work on some of their user experience stuff internally, and it's right over here in I think it's technically Culver City. It might be the marina, but it's over on the west end of Culver City. Is right where it's in that same area as like the new YouTube headquarters.
Oh, wow.
Where they kind of fought to get the swamp to be drained for 20 years and then won, and then whoosh, everything is just being sold. And but anyway, it's an interesting super white, super pristine building, like from a sci-fi, and you go in and they have like some of the servers out front almost as kind of like to greet you with like, oh, there's the internet over there. Really?
I had no idea it was there.
Yeah. It's here in town. At least part of it is here in town. I hope that we don't have the entirety of the DNS folks here in town. But I think when you're talking about those like dudes with the 7 keys,
right,
or 14 keys or whatever it is, a bunch of them are right over there.
Unreal.
So quite near where we're recording right this second as it happens. But yeah, so I mean that's the fun part, is that this is the first time that this kind of attack has been made, and we know for a fact that we're heading for more of the same, because we are, or at least that possible vulnerability. Now, the other interesting thing is, after all the Putin suspicion, we found out that no, it was one manufacturer who supplied the chipboards, and most, if not maybe even all, of the attack came from one chip manufacturer who those devices, or those that like circuit board, then got put into specific CCTV cameras and I think the baby monitors, right, and DVRs and whatnot, and they all came from one Chinese company, leaving people to kind of,
it's like accident, lack of intentional oversight, innocent oversight,
yeah. And we may never know whether because here's the thing, it could have been, I mean, it's certainly possible that somebody in the Chinese government, in a quasi-state ruled state, said, hey guys, we need you to knock this out, and by the way, put this little thing over here and don't look, and good job, or whatever.
Right.
I know very little about China and manufacturing processes. It's also possible that they just made their stuff like they always do and didn't care about security, because nobody does, right? Like, a significant portion of devices out there that have internet accessibility built into them never get any of their settings changed. You
right. Like go default passwords, admin, or,
Right. Password is your password. Exactly. Or like in Spaceballs, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And that's the password that comes from the store, and you don't. I don't.
Some people don't even know to change.
Absolutely,
people don't read the instructions.
I wouldn't know to go look at my baby monitor, right? But evidently that was one of the devices that was in there. And as we get to talking about other devices that are going to get connected. Would you have you changed the password on your car? I don't have a Wi-Fi enabled car, I don't think. But they're getting to be more and more, and I would bet that a significantly small portion of people have changed some of those admin settings, or even know that they exist.
Right.
So you can't get too far down the road of rattling sabers at the country of China when, their easiest defense would be like, well, morons, change the password. Because any malicious attacker could come at this simply by attempting to see if the password is password.
That's fair. And not too long ago, like there are some sites that literally aggregate all these open baby cams. Like people just leave it wide open.
Right.
And it's like, to me, that's the precursor of it. And like no one takes it seriously.
Yeah.
Insecurity is the new
just
security.
Baby cams, right? It was like people's webcams too.
Right.
And that you could just randomly find whatever was going on different people's webcams. So you could see the face of somebody, at work, not realizing that you were looking at them.
Right.
I remember that. And exactly. That's exactly the kind of thing, right? That you don't even know that I can get in there. That's what's going on with conceivably tons of our devices.
Oh yeah.
And it's only getting bigger. And we're gonna have to change things because whoever did this, be it a foreign power, be it just a random group of hackers or whatever, they are exploiting a weakness that we're not going to want them to do because damn it, when Twitter goes down on Friday morning, who's going to appreciate my quippy I hate weekends? Wait, no, I hate Mondays. Thank God it's Friday.
That might not even matter anymore. They're supposedly firing over 300 people soon.
To me, Twitter?
Yeah. To me, they're MySpace 3.0.
Wow. And that, boys and girls, is another story for another day. Hello, Diginauts listeners. Guess what? We're on iTunes now. Hooray! Episode 6, we're on iTunes. We don't want you to support us with ads today. We're going to forsake the ads. We want you to support us by going to the iTunes store and rating this podcast. If you like us, give us a 5. Put a rating in there. That's the very thing that can cause us to succeed. It's a make or break in the birth of a podcast, and we would love your help. If you're enjoying the show, by all means, give us a little boost. It's free. It costs you nothing. Thanks very much. We love you.
In this segment of Future File, we'll start to talk about a technology that's in its infancy, but not quite ready. More and more voice is becoming important. It's not optimal to text via voice, to even speak to things, computers, and interfaces. Well, imagine avoiding that at all possibilities. Imagine instead of talking, I could be just thinking about things, thinking about what I'm going to say. And then another device translates those brainwaves into actions, words, sentences.
Right. So we talked about this recently, or something like it, right? We talked about the using Wi-Fi to detect your thoughts.
Right.
But that was a little more basic, right? Like it could tell if you were happy. It was reading your heart rate.
Exactly. Whereas this one...
Here we're talking like words?
Exactly. So it's really decoding your thoughts into actual speech and actual words.
Wow.
Now, obviously it is pretty far off, but its implications are huge. You think about being hands-free in a car. Yeah. If I have to interact with Siri, there's the whatever equivalent of OK Google. There's the Hey Siri. I don't know how you summon Siri without pushing the button.
I believe it's Yodelay. Siri.
Yahoo.
No, that's not it.
Yeah, Yahoo lost that opportunity. Anyways, but imagine not having to touch anything, just thinking about something, and then that device, that interface, is actually acting upon what you think.
Huh. So here I am again about to use the word creepy. Because the implications quickly, like being able to kind of control things with your mind makes a lot of sense, right? So there's a lot of technology breakthroughs happening with, like prosthetic devices or whatnot. So you want people who have, limited capabilities here or there to be able to do different things to be able to control whatever it is that they're hooked up to, whether it's a prosthetic or the mech that Sigourney Weaver uses to fight the queen at the end of Alien. If you're not capable of speaking or moving different appendages to be able to think and have that bring the giant claw up to snap the alien's neck. That makes plenty of sense.
Right.
So I can imagine sort of the everyday applications for everybody being that it's pretty great to, like, I don't know, change the radio or turn the lights on or whatever. We're basically sorcerers at that point, right? Like, you just walk into a room and think, lights dimmer.
Right.
And then boom, it is.
I know. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, the thing about this technology, it is truly in the future. Like right now, there has to be some connection to the brain.
Right.
So obviously that would prevent it from working with the phone at the moment, working with basically anything.
So we're not sorcerers unless we wear our magic cap.
Right.
If we have the magic cap on.
Yeah. Or swallow this. And,
Again, with the inside the body. No, sir. Well, and that brings me to the part where I'm like, wait a second. Like, if I'm connected to this device and it's actually translating thoughts to words.
Right. I mean, this goes back to like our whole thing about like Amazon Echo and Google. Okay, Google. Like, it's not always okay.
Right.
And you can't always be listening, and you can't always be connected to me, because then to your point, which I think you're getting to, like, then it knows everything you're thinking.
Yeah.
I'm hungry for a cheeseburger.
It's not even that's not the hunger I worry about, frankly. Right? You're in some sort of work meeting and somebody next to you is wearing something intriguing and you catch a glimpse and suddenly the whole room knows that you've caught a glimpse. No, thank you. Yeah. So I mean there's potential for some bugs have to be worked out of that. You would have to have some kind of settings panel where you could come in and say...
The thought police.
No.
But that's what it comes down to. Like, if this thing can decipher your thoughts, there are weird things that can happen as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and so that's what I mean, is like, you're allowed to relay my thoughts that have to do with a device, let's say, but not perhaps my thoughts that have to do with another person.
Well, how are you governing that?
I don't know. I'm just saying I don't want to be strapped into my magic wizard hat until, it's not going to register if the...
Darren has bad thoughts.
I have all sorts of bad thoughts. I freely admit this, but I don't want to prove that I have bad thoughts because no good can come of that. For one thing, I'm a married man, and thoughts are private. But no. So the second sort of creepy area that got me to was in my head. Like, once you get to where the machines are listening, right? So yes, there's that sort of, and then corporations are collecting our every thought and mood,
right?
But there's also that sort of like, well, then if I'm connected to a machine that can read thoughts and you're connected to a machine that can read thoughts, why do we need to talk?
Right. That's interesting.
And eventually we're just one beehive.
That's interesting. I mean, to your point, like, if I'm thinking and my thoughts are then texted to you,
right? And then the machine reads it out loud to me,
right? Well,
why would we have such a step?
Well, I would say, like,
shoot them straight in.
It might skip it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. It might just because if we can figure out what signals
are coming out,
how to translate the signals coming out,
send them back in,
then it should be just a 1-to-1,
right?
Unless we find out that every individual's brain, I don't know, I was going to say chemistry, but that's not right. Brain scanny wavy thing is different.
I think that's intriguing. I would venture that they're similar, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, we're going to be measuring electrical activity of some kind.
Right.
So if it's electrical...
It has to be... I would say it has to be similar.
From person to person.
Yeah.
What if one person is thinking in Japanese as opposed to in Greek?
That's fair.
Right? I mean, even simply the length of the characters, depending... And some... So here's another example. I'm a very slow reader. right? I actually kind of, if I read a book for pleasure, I kind of say the words in my head, which is slow, right?
Right.
You're not supposed to do that, and yet I do. I always have. So I would assume that my brain processing each of those words one at a time is going to be different than a speed reader who has trained himself or herself to read a line at a time.
Right. Interesting.
It's got to be. So there's got to be some degree of making up for that. And if you're shooting a speed reader's words into my head at the rate of or perhaps like teenagers or toddlers, the way they process the world.
I mean, I
tried to feed that into a grown-up. We're like,
that to me is the next generation of Google Translate.
So you'll go to the site and pick Farsi and toddler as your options.
I think it would almost already know.
Oh yeah, of course. It would you just have toddler brainwaves, and of course it knows you have toddler brainwaves. Well, for that matter, maybe if what we were theorizing before, if it's different from language to language, maybe you just have Farsi brainwaves, and it would just know that, right? It would just be a straight up babblefish,
right?
That like handles like, oh, you're talking that, we gotcha,
right? I mean, I think it could at this point. I mean, candidly, like people are gonna have. There's so many sensors out there. There's so many things that are being detected that previously were not. Right. And I think different uses are being invented for them, like this. At some point, I'm going to need clothing that can block all of this. If it's not something that's embedded in me.
And as it happens, we're going to dive into that exact concept in the next segment. So let's leave this one there. Hey, Eric, guess what?
What?
We're on iTunes. It's time for everybody in the world to go to iTunes and rate us. We're gonna tell you this over and over in between segments. Just go right now. Pause the podcast. The next segment, it's okay. It's pretty good, but it's not as important as you going to iTunes right now and giving us a nice rating. It's the way that people will be able to find out iTunes is still the game when it comes to podcasting. So please, pretty please, help out the Diginauts by heading to iTunes and saying good things. Hey, it's time for segment 3. It's jurisprudent. What do we got to talk about today? Jurisprudent is the segment where we discuss the law and technology and how they're almost never in sync. What are we going to discuss?
Yeah, so everyone has probably heard about the AT&T merger with Time Warner and everything that comes along with that. Mm-hmm. Big bundles, big data, big content. We'll see if it goes through regulatory approval.
The things going through the pipes and the pipes themselves being owned by the same people.
Exactly. So they've ultimately been monetizing their own pipes, so to speak, not necessarily for bandwidth, not for content, and things along those lines, but more along the lines of mining what people are saying and communicating and reselling that to the government.
So, yeah, good stuff. We were just talking about how everybody's listening to you all the time, right? So you're going to need an anti-read my brain, read my pulse suit, and here we go, right? So they're using. So this is akin to Google. It's close to what they're doing, right? Where they're kind of like, no human is reading your Gmail, but computers are sniffing the keywords in your Gmail in order to figure out what ads to send you.
Right.
And really, the same thing is happening throughout the Google ecosystem.
Yep.
And as we discussed previously, with the new Google Home, they're going to be listening to you constantly, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's where we've crossed a line. If this is the case, that it's not a company listening to you in order to theoretically anonymously, send back to you information that you hopefully are more interested in. And by information, I mean advertisements. But here you're saying that they are taking that information and sending it to the good old government of the USA.
So AT&T years ago, they put this
USA, right?
USA?
They're not selling it to other companies.
Oh, they couldn't. Not so sure about that.
Yeah, not yet.
Why not? So, years ago, it was revealed that they had a product called Hemisphere where, it's a program run by AT&T, and they search the trillions of calls that, flow through their system, whether it be cell data or things like that. So they know what cell towers you're communicating with. They know where you're located via triangulation with those cell towers. They know, obviously, who you speak with, what you've said, and potentially why you're speaking to those people.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty interesting from that perspective. I guess, the New York Times came across like this bland PowerPoint presentation that AT&T made, and actually the Drug Enforcement Agency made it, but it basically revealed the quote-unquote partnership with AT&T, aka this Hemisphere product that lets them mine all these conversations for all that type of data.
So does this mean that I should switch to Verizon in order to protect my Fourth Amendment rights?
Candidly, I think
they're all
irrespective of if you're saying it and pretty much anyone can hear it, in my opinion, it's just a matter of time before other versions of Hemisphere, if not already, in other platforms and providers like Verizon.
This was going on and we didn't know about it.
Exactly. This is dating back to 2013. It wasn't until the Daily Beast kind of resurfaced this recently this week. So.
Oh, okay. So is this
Well, its intention was originally for law enforcement purposes.
Right.
Drug dealers, criminals, and whatnot. But again, it's so all-encompassing. It's not as if, they're just sitting back. It's all this data, all this voice information, which cell towers, where you are, and what you're saying, and who you're saying it to, is readily available.
Yeah. And here, this gets into the idea of warrants again.
Right.
Right? That it's one thing to listen to your call once I suspect that you're dealing drugs or planning terrorist attacks. It's another thing to listen to your call in case you're doing those things, right? That ain't cool. That's not allowed under a little thing called the Bill of Rights.
Right.
And this has been going back and forth basically since 9/11, right? Which happens to coincide with right about when this kind of technology comes about, that the NSA listening, which the Senate curbed recently, I believe, a little. But then there was kind of the mysterious question of what was going to happen to the information they'd already gathered, and did they really curb it?
Right.
I don't know the details of that. I just know that has been a discussion for a little while.
Yeah, this ultimately resurfaced because there was a court case, I guess, in Victorville where a family was murdered, and a motorcyclist came across their remains, and ultimately they wound up suspecting someone of this crime, right?
Okay.
And they wound up working with AT&T and their Hemisphere product to determine, okay, did this person or was this person in that vicinity? So they leveraged the cell towers to triangulate where he was, when he was,
right,
and conceivably what he was doing there.
This is part of the plot of the Serial podcast, which I've mentioned that I'm not done listening to because I'm a dad and I never get to listen to anything. But that part of why that crime investigation was as complicated as it was that they had cell phone records that placed people in certain places and certain times. And so they knew that if a given crime happened, it had to happen in the span of 21 minutes. And there was a question of whether it could be pulled off in that amount of time. I'm not spoiling anything if anybody hasn't listened. So that's becoming more and more a thing. But again, you're in the world of crime investigation, right? We're trying to find out somebody's guilt or innocence, and that's when it becomes more okay to do some investigation where, a wise person sitting on a bench has to approve of the fact that you want to cross a line, a privacy line. Like there's a process that goes along with that. And,
Right.
and it sounds like as a corporate policy, these guys are circumvening that. Is that what's happening?
I don't think they're circumvening it. But ultimately, the police wound up using this. The suspect, they interviewed him, and he was suspected of this, but they couldn't really pin him down. And then, they knew they were business partners. They knew there was like gambling debt, among other interesting things, but they couldn't really make the arrest. And I guess they wound up finding the suspect's DNA, or actually the people who were killed, their DNA inside his vehicle. And then they turned to AT&T and Project Hemisphere to really pin down his location and things along those lines, further tying him to the murder scene.
So they must have already had knowledge, obviously, that Hemisphere existed.
Yeah, they basically created an affidavit for, I think, his girlfriend's call records.
Okay.
Via Hemisphere.
Okay. Yeah. So they went. The crime happened, and then they went backwards in time, and rather than gathering new evidence, they collected old evidence. Again, that's kind of what the NSA is theoretically doing with like, no, we just got every phone call stored on a computer. We're not listening to it, right? We're just collecting
We're
it
not actively
in
listening.
case we feel like listening to it.
And to Snowden's point, it's all about the metadata. It's not necessarily just the conversations. It's,
Well, it's also the conversations.
Well, of course it is. But here's my point. Like, a lot of the metadata alone can be very valuable and incriminating.
Well, and so that's an interesting thing, right? So the Fourth Amendment says that there's no right to, unlawfully search and seize. That you can't stop somebody and say, hey, I think you're guilty of something, or like, I'm going to check you just in case you're guilty of something.
Let me pre-authorize your body part depressing.
Well, I mean, because that's where up until now, it has always applied essentially to exactly your body. I can't, as a law enforcement officer, stop somebody and say, hey, turn out your pockets, because that's a privacy violation. And I can't, so in order to do that, I have to go get a warrant and say, I have reasonable reason to think this person's bad.
But according to the article, no warrant is required to make use of AT&T's Hemisphere products. And law enforcement only needs to disclose Hemisphere and that it was used if an investigation that used it becomes public.
If it becomes public?
Yeah.
So we can
How about
investigate
that?
you all you want all we want in private? Because that's creepy.
Exactly. I mean, that's the ultimate problem.
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So I can't square that, right? Like,
Right.
Are you searching my person? No. Are you searching my house? No. Are you searching my papers? No. But are you searching my effects? Right? So that's an interesting word. And this goes into that same realm as a lot of other stuff, right? The Second Amendment wasn't talking about AK-47s.
Right.
It was talking about muskets. However, our interpretation as a country is
become
like,
all-encompassing.
it doesn't matter what, if it's a giant cannon,
just
yeehaw, strap her on. That's not true. There are limitations to what can happen in terms of like what a private person can hold and how long, blah, blah, blah. And obviously where we come down as a country on, where that line is a hot button topic right now.
But so is this.
But this should be, and this is my point, is I don't think it is, right? I don't think that, people are as concerned or as aware. Maybe it's just one of those things where, like, guns kill people. It's obvious, right? So you can take a side on that. Whereas this is a little more theoretical, right? Have I been offended by my government for doing that? And did I really lose anything? As opposed to, if you make me not have a gun, I can't defend myself when the aliens come, or when they remake Red Dawn again with another bad guy or whatever. And I get that, like, different people from different parts of the country have different reasons to think differently about guns. Totally get that. I grew up around guns myself, but again, like, an AK-47 makes no sense to me in any way. That's for killing lots of people. That's a weapon of war, and you don't need one to defend your house. You don't need one to shoot a deer. If you do need one to shoot a deer,
you have bad aim.
You are a terrible hunter, and you have no business hunting. Like, you should practice with some other weapons. And so we're talking then about the Fourth Amendment, and it's like, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's just where we're going to draw the line, where we're going to let that line sit.
Right.
And because the technology is so new, right? This is the reason we wanted to have one of these, this as a segment we visited constantly, because the technology is so new, we kind of haven't said, hey, government, right? So this becomes one of those things where I assume somebody's going to have to sue somebody for violating their privacy. And, unfortunately, it may be a criminal who has to do it.
Right.
And then as a country, are we supposed to root for the criminal? So I guess what has to happen is an innocent person has to have their rights violated for the political will to be such. Or we all have to just say that it's a big enough deal to us.
Or
right?
just vote with your money and don't go through AT&T.
Well, yeah, but again, yes, I will not support AT&T for this reason. Literally, like, I have an order in my stock portfolio to pick up some AT&T as they go down over their Time Warner offer, right? And I'm going to cancel it because I don't like to support companies that I can't get behind the way they do business.
Right.
So if this is legit, I'm going to read some articles. I don't know about this, but if this is legit how they're operating, I'm not cool with that. But I get also that it's a fine line between them and Apple and Amazon and everybody else who's listening to us. So if anybody needs me, I'll be off in the corner building a tinfoil hat and
prepper
and rocking back and forth, sobbing.
Hey, you listening? Yeah, I know you are. You're listening to our podcast, and we appreciate it. But we'd appreciate it more if you go to iTunes, especially the store, go in, log in, leave us a review, preferably 5 stars, and write nice things, and we'll get this podcast where it really needs to be in terms of more listeners. Thanks. We've touched on this before, and we're going to revisit a bunch of topics, but in the past, prior episodes, we've talked about the ability to alter genes and DNA for not only good purposes, but also potentially bad purposes, basically, the human equivalent of GMO. But in reality, DARPA is realizing this can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
So,
and DARPA is the Defense Against Really Poor... I don't know what DARPA is.
I forgot the acronym.
It's a government agency.
It's a defense organization, part of the government. They do contests.
They use science for government reasons.
Exactly. Autonomous vehicles for military purposes. Very interesting organization. So they're basically like, well, wait a minute. If we're altering mosquitoes to kill, mosquitoes with Zika, if we're doing other things that are potentially messing with science, we have to be able to undo it if something goes wrong. Like, you make an accident or an error on a Word document. On Windows, you can hit Ctrl-Z and undo it. Well, they're ultimately saying we need the equivalent in the context of these genetic engineering accidents so that crises can be averted immediately.
Right. So I'm going to say a couple things. One, I had to look it up because I have to know things like this. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
There you go.
So it's the sort of experimental wing of the military.
Yep.
And who's out there trying out technology in order to always stay ahead of things. If you look at in the news from this week, it says DARPA's robo-boat tests parasailing radar.
Wow.
So that gives you kind of like
broad
a
spectrum
feel of who these guys are, right? They're out like, yeah, we should hook up a radar off the back of a speedboat controlled by a robot just to see how that works. And obviously they got some money to do that. So, in order to So there's that. They're out there doing that, so we need to say that. And I got to say, my reaction to this, the Ctrl-Z idea, is kind of, as much as I will rail against, the government fairly often, here I'm kind of like, well, thank freaking God, right? Like, Ctrl-Z everything.
Yeah, and they're ultimately calling it the Safe Genes program. And then a subset of that, there's another acronym called CRISPR, and that's their intention, to snip out like the rogue mutation that is just causing havoc, should it cause havoc.
Right. Okay, see, and then this is where it lost me again, right? Because they were talking about like, oh, we're going to re-engineer things so that, that we get rid of sickle cell, let's say. And now, because in my head, everything is a Tom Clancy novel about somebody all technology will ultimately fall into the wrong hands eventually. Now,
right.
Like, oh man, you're gonna Control-Z people's cures for different diseases, right?
Well,
see, now the bad guys don't need to wreck the technology to begin with. They can take the good technology and undo it.
Well,
and people will collapse into piles of dust.
At the moment, mice are impacted. That's only that's the spectrum.
Well, I don't want the ability to disintegrate those mice to fall into the wrong hands.
So, but yeah, you're right. Like, it can be used for good, can be used for bad, and I think that lens is up to interpretation.
Yeah, of course. Well, no, I mean, look, if we're gonna go there and we're gonna start messing with things on the guanine, uranine level, then by all means, let's make sure we have a way to put it back.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense, right? If the Zika mosquitoes turn out to be, unstoppable,
right?
then we better have a backup code of some kind.
A mea culpa pill or something. I mean, I think,
wow.
Even at some point, I think, bioengineering or genetic engineering will become a weapon, which I think is another area of interest to DARPA. So then it's like,
yeah, you don't say.
If someone, launches a genetic bomb here, and anyone impacted by it
we want to be able to undo it,
has become, somewhat changed as a result, that's a problem. I think
we just wrote a movie.
Well, I think that's the guise under which they're undertaking this.
Yeah.
They're not doing it for fun. They're a government organization that clearly has strong military ties,
and for fun. So the other thing we were going to revisit, we're going to segment 4 is rapidly becoming sort of the place that we go back and talk about things we've talked about before.
Right.
I was looking for some sort of segment 4, we talked about it before. I don't have a good rhyme yet. But the other thing that we were going to revisit here is we had a suggestion from one of our listeners. If you remember, I think it was 2 episodes ago, I brought up that I don't love the way audiobooks are like, I don't want to say I read a book if I in fact listened to it.
Yeah, and you came up with a book.
I like a-booking, right? I'm a-booking that.
Yeah, which I'm still not a fan of.
You're a fan of listened to.
Yeah.
We had a suggestion from a listener, and she said that you could call it hear reading.
Hear reading?
Hear reading, like I hear read that. And so I think the virtue she was proposing is that read already has kind of read and read, and you're here reading it. I don't love it because it's two words with the same sound. The R from hear and read bleed together, so that introduces the kind of error of what you're gonna say. She also hyphenated it, although I hyphenated a book too. So, but
don't hate the hyphen.
Much like the hyphen in email, I think the a book hyphen will go away in a decade or two. Once, of course, a-booking catches on like the plague, which is no doubt. But so let me ask you this:
I don't even use a hyphen for email.
Let me ask you this: do you like hear reading more than you like a-booking?
No.
Aha.
I still like listen to.
So to Sarah, who sent us that tweet, thank you very much for your suggestion. We're shooting it down.
Come up with a better one.
But that's exactly what I was going to say. But to you and to everyone else, Eric says that I listened to, which is not an invention of a word. It's just
no need to invent.
But there's so many extra syllables in order to add clarity to it. I want something that says what it is, and that sometimes that means inventing a new word. So those are we're gonna say that those are still the king of the hill possibilities for this situation. So to Sarah and to everybody else listening, keep the suggestions coming. I still think this is a problem to be solved. But again, it might just be my neurosis. And keep the feedback coming on all our segments.
Hey, Darren, you know what I need?
Open-ended questions like that always end in embarrassment.
Not today.
Oh, good.
I need reviews on iTunes.
We really need reviews on iTunes.
We do.
We've forsaken ads today in order to remind people over and over and over again.
We're brought to you by ourselves.
By ourselves. Listen, you don't want us to interrupt our podcast next week with nothing but us asking you to go to iTunes, do you? So do it this time, and then we won't next time. It's a great bargain for everybody. We could really use the help. We'd really appreciate it. It's the number one thing you could do to help support this podcast and get the word out.
We always want to know what you think about the topics we cover, and we candidly cover a variety of topics. This one is intriguing and kind of is thematically similar to some in the past, where we've talked about, a monkey picking up a camera and taking a photograph, and then talking about who actually owns the copyrights to that photo.
Right, and for the record, you come down that the monkey owns the copyright?
That's my opinion.
Okay.
And I don't monkey around.
Really? I would maintain that either the photographer, I think there's a case for the photographer owning it, or nobody owns it. And here's why, because I've been thinking about it since then. If I set up camera traps, right?
Right.
And I'm attempting to prove that the Tasmanian tiger still exists in the wilds of Tasmania. And I went out and I put those cameras in place, and the last remaining Tasmanian tiger and its little cubs scoot past my IR beam at just the right moment, and I get the cover of National Geographic, right? I made that happen.
Well, you created a condition of which you could have caught the last Tasmanian devil. You didn't take the photo. They took it by triggering the photograph. You didn't take it.
I did.
You did not.
In the same way that if I push the button on a camera, I am causing the mechanism to do what it wants to do.
But you are not depressing. They're interrupting.
Yeah, but I created
beam.
the conditions, and I believe this, by the way, in the monkey selfie case, is sort of what the lawyers argued on his behalf too. That he claims that he created the condition, which in his case I sort of don't buy that at all.
Yeah,
right?
He put his camera down in the wild.
Right. Well, that
jungle.
was the condition that needed to be created. Anyway, so I think there's a degree to which I think you could create an argument that the person owns it. I think the thing that makes the most sense to me is perhaps no one owns it. What I don't buy is that the monkey owns it, and my reason is that as soon as you do it, then the monkey has rights that, and again, I think this is why, if you're PETA, you're brilliant to pick up that case as they did, right? And it becomes a slippery slope to that monkey being able to buy a house in Malibu.
Interesting. Well, what do you think about computers?
With the royalties off their selfie.
Well, what do you think about computers actually owning things that they've created?
Right. Okay. So what's our story?
So increasingly, artificial intelligence is playing a vital role in everything that we do.
Yeah.
Almost every company from Amazon to Google to Microsoft is using it. They're bringing it to the forefront, and it's becoming increasingly accessible to them, but also consumers in a variety of formats, if you think about it.
Okay. So, and we discussed a segment earlier where an AI created some music.
Yep.
And so are we talking about something like that the software author shouldn't own the right to the music, that the software itself should own the music?
Yes. Ultimately, these researchers, notably Professor Abbott, is ultimately saying that increasingly AI can come up with ideas that can be patentable.
Okay.
Right? And I guess years ago, an artificial intelligence system called the Creativity Machine actually invented something. It invented the cross-bristled toothbrush design, which is interesting. Like, a person didn't do it, the computer did. So it's like, who owns that?
Yeah. So my counter argument again is, sure, a person didn't, behold the idea that became the cross-bristled toothbrush, but they created the tool that was capable of doing it. I mean, at some point, are you arguing that Michelangelo didn't carve the David, that this chisel did? Boom.
I mean, I think...
How is that different?
It's
a
method
tool
to the madness.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, they're both tools, but like one tool is far more advanced than a chisel.
Right. But I don't have a horse in this race. So I don't necessarily think, and I don't want to fly contrary to the episode of Star Trek The Next Generation in which they tried to decide whether Data was property of Starfleet or not. So I'm being obtuse with the example of the chisel, right? But then again, I'm not, because it allows us to examine more closely the example of the software, right? It's a far more sophisticated tool that somebody created, but it's no different than it's an implement that a human used to be able to make something, right?
Yeah, but from the article, they make the case that typically whether a computer should replace the skilled person using the
Right.
tool. It's not as if it's just a tool that's doing Michelangelo's work on its own. Like,
Right.
clearly he and his helpers made that happen.
I think that makes sense as the distinction, right? That Michelangelo had a vision and caused the work to happen with the tool, as opposed to the AI example that we had. They filled it with samples of music and it made choices.
Right.
They left it alone, let it do its work, and there, out came stuff. With this last segment of the day, which we're calling "What's Your Take?" Our goal is not so much to come up with like what we think for sure, as much as it is to introduce questions, and we'd love to hear what you and the audience think about them.
Absolutely.
So, I definitely see a couple of sides to the argument about the AI owning stuff. Does the article you're referencing have, kind of examples of artwork that different AI has made?
The only one that I saw them reference was that bristled toothbrush.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's probably other examples.
See, I also could imagine a problem if you create software that's capable of making patents, and maybe it's just
A troll machine?
Yeah, exactly. Like you're creating something whose job it is to spit out infinitely many patents, expecting that one of them is going to be something good. It's almost the equivalent of like domain squatters.
Right, but there's actually ways around that. We had a side conversation last time where there's a startup called Unpatent, where it's basically a
Right.
Kickstarter where you raise funds to pay legal fees and to pay people to find prior art to invalidate a patent that you find to be ludicrous.
Right. But for the sake of this argument, we want to assume that, and I'm going to take it to the extreme silly example, right? Let's imagine a sentient android who wants to be human. Like I mentioned Star Trek before, right? So Data wants to grow up and be human. And he goes into his quarters and, sits down and thinks about how to make the perfect toothbrush and comes up with something. And boom, there you go. Does he get a patent? So if we're taking it to that kind of extreme, I gave the example of like, okay, if you essentially have a million monkeys, in this case, a million AI softwares out there trying to patent as many things as they can, right? That's almost using kind of an infinite principle. But let's say, nope, it came up with something amazing. No prior, nothing, right? Because that's the real crux that we want to examine is a non-human coming up with something extraordinary.
Right.
And a wonderful invention. The question being, who owns the intellectual property rights to that extraordinary invention?
I think
that's what we'd have to
I
get
think
down to.
the computer should.
So we get to but you have that exact same problem, right? That if the computer owns it, then do we need to make a separate category for non-human rights? To in other words, like, where does the royalty check go when it gets sold?
It goes to the computer, and the computer.
What's the computer going to do with that, right?
It can invest that money
in what?
in the stock
The computer
market.
doesn't need it. It's,
Or in
I
its-
guess
in
I guess to
itself.
fund its next invention, right?
Exactly. In itself.
Congratulations, Eric. You just created Skynet. Yeah, no, I mean, it's the same thing with the monkey, right? Like, what's the monkey going to do? The monkey's not going to take the money and buy a bunch of bananas and
Well, he doesn't know how
sit
to. He
royalty
doesn't
forever.
need to.
Exactly.
But he should. He should get the money. Show the monkey the money.
He doesn't have anything to do with the money. The money
He could save the forest.
Here's what it comes down to.
He could invest the money and save the
Money is
forest.
a human concept, right? And these guys don't necessarily have an appreciation of that concept unless it's put there by a human.
We could pay him in bananas.
We could. The monkey would eat those bananas and be happy
Eat
about
the
that,
profits.
right? But if I'm selling something for if I sell that selfie for $8 million, that's
a lot of bananas.
That's a lot of bananas. It's more bananas, let's say, than a given monkey can eat in the course of that monkey's lifetime.
Yes, friends.
What happens to the rest of the money?
You shared.
Who decides this?
A committee.
The monkey committee? Is the monkey committee paid in bananas too?
Maybe we show him a series of photos
I'm simply pointing out
of other
that
jungles with monkeys,
it
and he
creates
points,
a gray
and we
area.
airdrop the monkeys, airdrop the bananas
And,
to his monkey friends.
as soon as you introduce the possibility of a non-human owning the rights, then you have to introduce the idea of a custodian to anything that that because intellectual property is property, and we don't assign property to any non-human in
We should.
in our society.
We should.
Perhaps.
We tread on their property.
Sure, absolutely. I totally legit. I get what you're coming from. but my point is you sort of can't open up that possibility because as soon as you do, it wrecks everything, and like we either have to throw out property, right? That's a possibility. In which case the conversation is moot anyway because nobody owns anything, and who cares? There's no copyright. It just exists now where it didn't before. You're only now talking about credit. Well, the monkey gets the credit for the photo, and I accept that. Yep, the monkey gets the credit. Good job, monkey. Right? But property is a different thing. And in terms of having a set of rules that can apply to every situation, which is theoretically what law is about, the moment you go across human species as people who have property, you've introduced so much doubt that the system crashes. I don't know, right? Like, what if a monkey invents something that becomes the key to entire aspects of the economy, right? A monkey invents the next iPhone, right? So it's now that monkey is the key, is the inventor of what has become a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Save the forests.
Or the robot is. But you just made a decision on behalf of the monkey.
What do you mean? To save the forest?
Yeah.
To save his own land?
We don't know that he wants to save the land. How do you know he wants to save his land and not? It's a multi-billion-dollar company. His piece of forest is like, 25 cents in the region that he's in. And now who decides that he wants to save the rest of the forest? You're making decisions on his behalf.
We show him pictures and he points. He or she points.
But so we need to now go get the brainwave technology from the earlier segment, set it from toddler down to monkey. And as long as that's in place, then okay. If you can translate the thoughts to the monkey and the monkey can then have some kind of conversation about it, if it's Coco the gorilla who is expressing something in some level, even no matter how base, then perhaps. But how are you going to ask your AI what it wants to do with the profits?
Don't know.
Perhaps you listening at home do know, and you can set us straight. We kind of came down on either side of that segment. I still think of it more of as an intellectual puzzle. I don't really feel like I care who has the rights to the selfie taken in the middle of the woods. But I do see that if for some reason we as a society decide that non-humans can own things, then that changes a lot. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but we want to know what you think. Should it happen? Should computers be allowed to be inventors? Should computers be able to own patents? Do computers get to exist perhaps the way companies do? We've recently had Supreme Court rulings that famously said that companies are people, sort of.
Good point.
So there's almost a little bit of legal precedent there. Listen at home. What do you think? Let us know. We are on Twitter. I am Digital Darren.
And I'm E. Fader.
And we'd also love to hear from you on the phone, 323-686-8255. Listen or leave us a voicemail, and you might hear it on the next podcast. Until then, that's it for this week. Good talk.